Agatha Raisin and the Halloween Horror in Carsely. Good evening and welcome, dear friends. Agatha Raisin hadn't expected the fog-drenched night to hide terror in Carsely. A scream shattered the quiet, echoing from the old cemetery, and something, or someone, vanished before her eyes. Calm and observant, Agatha sensed danger and intrigue intertwined. Who or what was stalking the village tonight? Before Agatha steps into today's mystery, we'd love to know something special from you. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Your comments remind us how far these little village tales can travel and how close they bring us all. And if these stories bring you comfort, do subscribe so you never miss a gentle moment with Agatha. So let's begin.
Chapter 1. The Pumpkin-Strewn Streets. Agatha Raisin pulled her woolen coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out into the narrow streets of Carsely. The village was transformed into a riot of orange and black, pumpkins perched on windowsills and hanging from crooked doorframes. Faint scents of autumn, crisp leaves, damp earth, and the lingering sweetness of baked apples mingled with the faint smoke of chimneys. Agatha inhaled deeply, savoring the familiar comfort of her village in its Halloween attire, yet a peculiar tension prickled the back of her neck. Something, she decided, was slightly off tonight. Her boots crunched over fallen leaves, and she noticed a lantern outside Mrs. Haversham's cottage flickering erratically. It cast shadows that danced across the cobblestones, as though some invisible audience were performing a silent play. Agatha tilted her head, observing the way the flame faltered, then steadied, then faltered again. Perhaps the wind, she murmured to herself, though she did not believe it entirely. There was a precision to the flickers, a rhythm that suggested intention rather than chance. She filed the thought away. The village rarely disappointed her intuition. Turning the corner, she saw young Timothy Broadwell carefully balancing a pumpkin on the low wall in front of his family's house. He froze mid-step, a smile faltering as he caught sight of her. "Evening, Miss Raisin," he whispered, almost conspiratorially. Agatha smiled warmly, watching the boy scamper back inside. Children always seemed to sense when something unusual was in the air, their instincts sharper than most adults. She made a mental note of Timothy's sudden retreat. Small reactions often spoke volumes. Passing the Bloxby residence, Agatha paused. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly with the evening breeze. A muffled murmur echoed from within, indecipherable yet urgent. Her eyes narrowed as she observed the flicker of candlelight through the cracked window panes. Usually, the Bloxbys were meticulous about keeping their home secure, especially during festival nights. Agatha's curiosity nudged her forward, though she resisted the immediate urge to investigate. Discretion, after all, was part of her charm and survival. Further down the lane, the night deepened. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, and the lamplight caught on cobwebs draped across the gateposts. From a distance, she could hear the faint rustle of garments and hushed whispers. Though no figure appeared, she paused again, listening. The sound could have been the wind or a neighbor moving about, but her instincts told her there was more. A small thrill ran through her. There was nothing she loved more than a little mystery nestled within the comfort of home. She smiled softly to herself, adjusting her scarf, and continued her walk. Cats slinked silently along fences, their eyes gleaming like tiny lanterns themselves. A slight shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from the cold, but she felt the familiar tingle of anticipation that always preceded a village secret being uncovered. Somewhere in the pumpkin-lit streets, she knew, something was waiting, though she could not yet see it. As she passed under the twisted branches of the old oak near the square, Agatha's mind catalogued the evening's oddities. The flickering lantern, the open door, the whispers in the shadows. Each detail seemed minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern her curiosity could not ignore. Quietly, methodically, she decided to keep her eyes and her wits alert. Carsely's Halloween might have appeared cheerful and bright, but even in the familiar, there could be a secret waiting just beyond sight.
Agatha Raisin adjusted the scarf around her neck as she approached the village square, where the Halloween festivities were in full swing. Lanterns swayed gently on wrought iron posts, casting pools of golden light over the cobblestones. Children darted between stalls laden with caramel apples and candied pumpkins, their laughter punctuating the crisp night air. The scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with smoke from a distant bonfire. Yet, amid the cheerful chaos, Agatha's sharp eyes caught a figure that seemed oddly displaced, a stranger standing near the fountain, watching the revelers with a peculiar intensity. The person was neither child nor villager. They wore a long, charcoal gray coat that brushed the ground, despite the mild breeze, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of their face. Their posture was rigid, almost cautious, as if every movement was measured, every step deliberate. Agatha's curiosity flickered. There was something theatrical in the stranger's presence, yet it was not part of any costume she had seen before. She slowed her pace, letting the crowd thin around her, and observed without announcing herself. "Evening," she said lightly, stepping closer. "Quite the night, isn't it?" The person jerked slightly, as if caught off guard, then nodded. "Evening," came the low, careful reply. Their voice was soft, almost hesitant, yet threaded with urgency. Agatha noted the way their gloved hands fidgeted with the coat's buttons, the subtle shift of weight from one foot to the other. Something in the rhythm was off, and her instincts, honed over years of village intrigue, told her this person had a story. "Not from Carsely, I take it," she prompted, letting her tone remain casual. "No, just passing through," the stranger said. Eyes darted briefly toward the square's corners before returning to her. I've heard things about tonight, unseen things, horrors hidden in sight plain." Agatha's eyebrows lifted slightly. The words were strange, almost theatrical, yet there was a genuine note of unease beneath them. "Unseen horrors," she repeated, soft but probing. "And what, pray tell, are these horrors?" The stranger's lips twitched into a brief, almost imperceptible smile, but no answer came. Instead, they produced a small, intricately carved talisman from inside the coat, holding it between thumb and forefinger. It was shaped like a crescent moon, etched with symbols Agatha did not immediately recognize. "A warning," she said finally, voice dropping to a whisper. "Be wary of what you don't see." Then, with a subtle nod, the figure turned and melted into the crowd before she could ask more. Agatha frowned thoughtfully, examining the space where the stranger had stood. The talisman seemed significant, though its meaning eluded her. She bent to pick up a fallen autumn leaf, absent-mindedly tracing its jagged edge, and wondered if the stranger's cryptic words were caution or threat, or perhaps both. Her mind catalogued the peculiarities, the coat, the hat, the measured movements, the talisman, the half-smile. Each detail was a potential clue, a thread to tug at, if only she could discern which way it would unravel. For a moment she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation, a cozy excitement, tempered with unease. Carsely had its secrets, as any small village did, and tonight she seemed as if one of those secrets had slipped into the open, briefly visible, before retreating again into shadow. Agatha's gaze swept the square one more time, noting the flicker of lanterns, the laughter, the swirling fog creeping along the edges of the stone paths. Somewhere in all of this, she knew, the stranger's warning had a purpose, and Agatha Raisin intended to uncover it. Chapter 2. Shadows at the Manor.
Agatha Raisin approached Carsely Manor with the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the evening air sharp but invigorating. The manor loomed above the village square, its tall, ivy-clad walls bathed in the pale light of a waning moon. Tonight, the grand estate was hosting a Halloween gathering for the villagers, a charity event that promised pumpkins, treats, and a smattering of mild theatrics. Agatha had attended these events before, enjoying the blend of social chatter and gentle intrigue. But tonight, the manor seemed different. The windows, usually warm and welcoming, flickered with strange shadows that made her pulse quicken. The front gates creaked as she pushed them open, and a faint whispering drifted through the crisp air. Agatha paused, tilting her head, listening. It could have been the wind playing tricks, curling through the high eaves and corners of the old stone building, but something about the cadence of the sound suggested otherwise. There were words there, just beyond comprehension, a sibilant rustle that seemed to carry urgency. Her curiosity sparked. There was no escaping the feeling that the manor itself was alive with secrets. As she stepped onto the cobblestone pathway, a lantern swayed violently on its wrought iron post, casting darting shadows across the ornate front door. Agatha noted how the darkness pooled and shifted in unnatural ways. "The wind or something else," she muttered, her voice low, more to herself than anyone else. A servant in a crisp uniform passed by, glancing at her with an expression that bordered on concern, or perhaps fear. Agatha filed that away, along with the shadow behind the second-floor curtain that seemed to twitch independently of the lantern's sway. The distant strains of a piano filtered through the open windows, cheerful but faintly discordant, adding an oddly eerie undertone to the night. Agatha's eyes scanned the entrance hall as she ascended the steps. Guests mingled, costumes rustling, and laughter echoing softly, oblivious to the subtle anomalies surrounding them. One young woman in a witch's cloak kept glancing over her shoulder, as though sensing a presence no one else noticed. Agatha's attention was drawn to the flickering candlelight on the grand staircase, where shadows played over the polished banister in shapes that seemed almost purposeful. She paused near the doorway, observing the interplay of light and dark. Each movement of the shadows was precise, almost deliberate, and Agatha felt that familiar tingle of anticipation. Something, or someone, was manipulating the scene, either knowingly or unwittingly. Her mind catalogued possibilities, narrowing them down to the most plausible while leaving room for the extraordinary. A floorboard creaked above, and the whispering sounded again, more distinct this time, like a fleeting conversation carried from room to room. Agatha's lips twitched into a faint smile, part amusement, part determination. She thrived on this sort of mystery. The small village in apparent celebration, the looming manor concealing secrets, and the subtle cues only a keen observer could notice. There was no immediate danger, yet the tension hummed beneath the cheerful surface. She straightened her coat, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and stepped further into the manor, her senses attuned to every flicker of light, every shadow's movement, and every whispering murmur.
Agatha Raisin ascended the narrow staircase that led to the uppermost floor of Carsely Manor, her fingers lightly tracing the polished banister. The hum of voices from the ballroom below faded, replaced by the quiet creaks and sighs of the old building. A faint draft brushed against her cheek, carrying the scent of aged wood and forgotten dust. Her instincts prickled. Somewhere above the cheerful din, a secret waited to be uncovered, hidden from the revelers' eyes. She paused at a small door, one that appeared inconspicuous amid the rows of painted panels. Its brass knob was slightly tarnished, as though rarely used. Agatha's curiosity got the better of her. With a deft twist, the latch gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by a single, swaying candle in a wall sconce. A fine layer of dust coated the floor, and cobwebs stretched across low beams, glinting faintly in the candlelight. This attic space had clearly been neglected for years, perhaps decades, and yet it exuded an air of purposeful secrecy. Stepping inside, she carefully picked her way around crates and trunks, each covered in faded cloths that smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. A small chest in the corner caught her attention. Its lid was scratched, the surface worn smooth in places. Agatha's curiosity got the better of her. With a deft twist, the latch gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage dimly lit by a single swaying candle in a wall sconce. A fine layer of dust coated the floor, and cobwebs stretched across low beams, glinting faintly in the candlelight. This attic space had clearly been neglected for years, perhaps decades, and yet it exuded an air of purposeful secrecy. Stepping inside, she carefully picked her way around crates and trunks, each covered in faded cloths that smelled faintly of mothballs and cedar. A small chest in the corner caught her attention. Its lid was scratched, the surface worn smooth in places. Agatha knelt, her fingers brushing over a brass clasp, and carefully lifted it open. Inside lay an assortment of objects: a bundle of letters tied with a fraying ribbon, a small wooden figurine carved with strange symbols, and a folded piece of parchment yellowed with age. Her eyes immediately went to the parchment. Scrawled in a precise, looping hand were notes that referenced names and dates she recognized only faintly from village gossip, alongside events that seemed distant or forgotten. Some entries were mundane, births, minor disputes, but others hinted at more sinister undertones: secret alliances, unexplained absences, and rumors of past grievances. Agatha's pulse quickened. These notes, long abandoned and hidden, could illuminate motives for the current unsettling events in Carsely. She carefully lifted the letters, unfolding one with delicate fingers. The paper crackled softly, revealing a message that suggested clandestine meetings and whispered conversations held in the dead of night. The wooden figurine she examined next depicted a crescent moon, similar in style to the talisman the stranger had shown her in the square, though smaller and crudely carved. Her mind raced, cataloging every detail. There were connections here, threads linking names, objects, and actions across time, waiting for someone observant enough to weave them together. A sudden scuff of movement from the corner of the attic made her start. She turned swiftly, expecting perhaps a startled mouse, but saw only a shadow cast by a rafter overhead. She laughed softly, more from relief than humor, and reminded herself of the simple rule: in Carsely, nothing was ever as innocent as it appeared. Before leaving, she carefully replaced the objects as she found them, arranging the letters and figurine neatly in the chest. Her mind whirred with possibilities. Who had placed these items here? Why had they been hidden for so long? And most importantly, how did this secret history connect to the mysterious events unfolding tonight? Agatha stepped back toward the narrow doorway, pausing to take one last survey of the attic's treasures, committing each detail to memory. As she descended the staircase, the distant music of the ballroom floated upward again, a comforting reminder of the world beyond the shadows. Yet, the attic's secrets lingered in her mind, a puzzle demanding attention, a mystery waiting to be untangled with patience and keen observation. Agatha Raisin knew one thing for certain: the night had only just begun.
Chapter 3: The Costume Ball.
Agatha Raisin entered Carsley's grand hall with the measured grace of someone who had attended enough village gatherings to know precisely how to appear interested without appearing desperate for company. The ballroom glittered with candlelight, reflecting off polished floors and crystal chandeliers, and the air was scented with a mixture of roses, spiced cider, and the faint tang of wax from the pumpkin lanterns lining the walls. Costumes swirled around her in a riot of color, witches with exaggerated hats, skeletons in tailored suits, and fairies with gossamer wings that shimmered under the soft lights. She allowed her eyes to drift over the crowd, noting the subtle tensions invisible to the casual observer. Lady Pennington, in a crimson gown with a matching Venetian mask, lingered near the punch table. Her eyes darted repeatedly toward a tall man in a wolf mask who seemed equally tense. Agatha raised an eyebrow. These two, she thought rightly, were likely involved in some private drama that would not escape her notice tonight. Costume or not, body language rarely lies. A hush of whispered conversation caught her attention, and she edged closer to the source. A group of villagers clustered near the musicians' platform. They spoke in tones so low that Agatha had to strain her ears, catching fragments of phrases. "Can't believe it happened again. Mustn't let anyone see. Before it's too late." She stored each snippet carefully, recognizing that every half-heard word could be a piece of a larger puzzle. Near the entrance, a man dressed as a Victorian ghost adjusted his spectacles nervously, glancing toward a small table where a carved pumpkin sat, its jagged grin illuminated by a flickering candle. Agatha noticed the faint smudge of ink on the man's fingers, a detail that could be easily overlooked but which, to her mind, suggested either haste or carelessness in some prior task. Small details, she knew, often mattered far more than grand gestures. Children ran past her in various costumes, squealing with delight, tugging at their parents' hands. Agatha allowed herself a quiet smile, appreciating the chaos and charm of the scene. Even as shadows and whispers hinted at underlying tensions, the cozy warmth of the gathering reminded her why she loved Carsley. Its villagers were eccentric, prone to melodrama, and endlessly intriguing. Each mask and cloak held a story, waiting for a careful observer to interpret. Her gaze fell on a delicate necklace lying partially hidden beneath the folds of Lady Pennington's gown. Catching the candlelight like a tiny secret, Agatha's curiosity was piqued. Why had it been worn so conspicuously yet partially obscured? A clue or merely decoration? The thought lingered as she moved toward the refreshment table, where a small, peculiar detail caught her eye, a folded note tucked beneath a plate of tarts. She resisted the urge to pick it up immediately, committing its placement and orientation to memory. Observation first, action later, that was her motto. A low murmur rose from the corner of the hall, where a three of villagers in matching masks appeared to exchange urgent glances, each gesture subtle, each movement measured. Agatha followed their eye contact and noted the small, seemingly innocuous ways they shifted in relation to one another. A brush of the sleeve, a tilt of the head, the careful avoidance of direct conversation with certain others. These tiny signals, she knew, were the invisible threads connecting private motives to public behavior. Amusement and curiosity danced in her chest as she sipped her cider, letting her gaze roam the room. Each whispered conversation, each subtle glance, each carefully chosen costume was a story waiting to be read. Agatha Raisin, keen observer and gentle provocateur, cataloged each moment, aware that tonight's merriment was as much about hidden intentions as it was about pumpkins and laughter. Beneath the cheerful chatter and glittering lights, the village's secrets stirred quietly, waiting for her to notice.
The cheerful murmur of the ballroom was abruptly shattered by a scream that cut through the music like a knife. Agatha Raisin's heart leapt into her throat as heads whipped around, and the swirling masks and glittering gowns froze mid-motion. Guests recoiled in shock, some clutching their hands to their chests, others seeking the source of the cry with wide, frightened eyes. Even the children stopped their games, the earlier laughter replaced by anxious whispers. Agatha's instincts immediately shifted from amusement to investigation. This was no ordinary Halloween fright. Pushing gently past the startled crowd, she followed the direction of the scream. It had come from the far end of the hall, near a side alcove lined with velvet curtains and dim lanterns. The shadows here were deeper, the warm glow of the chandeliers failing to penetrate fully, leaving flickers of darkness that seemed almost alive. Agatha's pulse quickened, but her mind remained sharp, cataloging each movement and expression. Panic, she knew, often revealed more than calm ever could. And then she saw it. On the polished floor, partially hidden beneath a discarded cape, lay a mask. It was ornate, carved with exaggerated features that seemed intended to terrify. Hollow eyes, a jagged mouth frozen in a silent scream, and intricate etchings along its edges. Agatha knelt carefully, noticing the dark smudge that stained its side. She frowned. Not ink, not soot, something far more alarming. A streak of deep red, almost certainly blood. A chill ran down her spine. This was no theatrical trick. Someone had been hurt. The surrounding guests whispered anxiously, some glancing at one another with suspicion, others muttering reassurances to themselves. Agatha's sharp eyes caught subtle cues she would have missed if not for years of village observation. A hand trembling at a punch glass, a quick sidelong glance exchanged between two masked villagers, a foot tapping nervously beneath the gown. These small reactions suggested hidden knowledge, secrets known only to a select few. The mask was a message, intentional or accidental, and the behavior of the crowd hinted that someone might already understand its significance. Carefully, she lifted the mask using the corner of her handkerchief, inspecting it without disturbing potential evidence. The weight felt oddly solid, and the craftsmanship suggested it was custom-made rather than a store-bought accessory. Agatha's mind cataloged everything: the location, the position relative to the curtain, the blood streak's angle, and the peculiar details etched into the mask's surface. Each element could be a clue, each subtle gesture from the bystanders another piece of the puzzle. A servant, white-faced and flustered, stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the room. "Everyone, please remain calm. Nothing to worry about. Just a minor accident, I'm sure." His words were hollow, failing to mask the tremor in his voice. Agatha's lips twitched into a faint smile, part wry, part grim. Minor accidents rarely involved blood on a carefully crafted mask. She glanced around again, taking mental note of the crowd's interactions. A young couple, in matching vampire costumes, exchanged a brief, tense glance and quickly separated, as if hiding knowledge or guilt. Across the room, a man with a fox mask lingered near the refreshments, one hand tucked into a coat pocket, as if to conceal an object or gesture. Every detail mattered. Every reaction could point to motive, opportunity, or alliance. Agatha set the mask down gently on a nearby table, her mind already forming a plan for discreet questioning. Tonight's cheerful festivities had shifted subtly into a web of mystery, and she, as always, intended to unravel it. Beneath the laughter, music, and flickering lanterns, danger, covert, calculated, and chilling, was at work. Carsely had revealed its first sinister sign of the evening, and Agatha Raisin was ready to follow the trail wherever it led.
Chapter 4. The Foggy Chase. A dense fog had rolled into Carsely by the time Agatha Raisin stepped onto the narrow village lanes, the edges of the street lamps smeared with a ghostly glow. The once familiar paths were transformed into a dreamlike labyrinth, cobblestones glistening with moisture and shadows stretching unnaturally through the mist. Agatha pulled her coat tighter and adjusted her scarf, the chill seeping through to her bones, yet sharpening her senses. Tonight, the village seemed to hold its breath, suspended between festivity and foreboding. She had glimpsed the figure near the ballroom just before the scream, a shadow moving too deliberately to be random. The fog now concealed their presence almost entirely, and Agatha's pulse quickened, not from fear, but anticipation. She moved deliberately, her boots making soft, measured sounds on the damp stones, her eyes scanning the indistinct shapes emerging from the mist. Each lamp flicker seemed to cast a suggestion rather than illumination, an invitation to observe more closely. A sudden scuff of movement drew her attention. She ducked behind a hedge, eyes narrowing. A figure, tall and cloaked, emerged through the fog, carrying themselves with purpose. Agatha noted the subtle sway of their coat, the careful placement of each step, and the faint glint of something metallic at their wrist. Her mind catalogued every detail, reasoning that someone moving in such a calculated way was either extremely cautious or hiding something of value. The figure paused, turning slightly toward a cluster of barrels stacked near the tavern. Agatha held her breath, watching as they seemed to fumble with an object, obscured by the fog. She could hear a faint rustle, almost as if the night itself were conspiring to conceal secrets. Then, as if realizing they were being followed, the figure darted down a narrow alley, disappearing entirely into the swirling mist. Agatha's lips curved a faint, determined smile. It was time to pursue, quietly, without drawing attention. She moved swiftly, her senses acutely aware of every shift in the fog, every sound amplified by the damp night air. Footsteps echoed behind her, though she could not discern whether they belonged to her quarry or some passing villager. The fog created illusions, shadows dancing in shapes that teased the eye, and she had to remind herself to focus on subtle, logical cues. A scuff mark on the cobblestones, a slightly disturbed leaf, the faintest sound of a cloak brushing against a wall. Each tiny clue added to her growing map of this mysterious pursuit. The night was eerily quiet, punctuated only by her own careful breathing and the distant muffled sounds of the manor's remaining festivities. Her mind raced, connecting threads. The scream at the ball, the bloodied mask, and now this cloaked figure moving purposefully through the fog. She reminded herself to trust her instincts and observations. Carsely might appear sleepy and quaint, but it was rich with secrets. And tonight she was uncovering them one careful step at a time. With a deep breath, she stepped into the alley, letting the fog envelop her, eyes sharp, senses alert, and determination steady. Whatever or whoever moved ahead was no longer invisible to her. Agatha Raisin would follow, quietly, persistently, unraveling the mystery that had begun in the flicker of a lantern and now stretched into the misty streets of Carsely.
Agatha Raisin pressed herself against the damp brick wall of the narrow alley, peering into the thick fog that obscured the street ahead. The cloaked figure she had been following moved with a fluid grace, stepping silently over puddles and fallen leaves. Agatha's sharp eyes noted each subtle motion, the way the figure's coat brushed the wall, the slight lift of a gloved hand, the deliberate pacing that suggested caution and familiarity with the village's twists and corners. She followed silently, every sense alert. The figure paused briefly near a low wooden gate, as though considering their next move. Agatha crouched slightly, keeping a careful distance, and observed a glimmer at the figure's belt, a small metal object
catching the faint light from a street lamp. She noted it meticulously, storing the detail in her mind: size, shape, placement. Such minutiae, she knew, could be a key to understanding motives or intentions. Just as the figure moved to lift the gate latch, Agatha stepped forward cautiously, raising her voice lightly. "Excuse me, may I help you?" The words were calm, friendly, yet carried the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, or at least listened to. The cloaked figure froze, one hand hovering above the latch, then spun around abruptly. Agatha caught a fleeting glimpse of a face obscured by the hat's shadow. The figure's eyes widened, and for a heartbeat it seemed recognition, or perhaps fear, flickered there. I'm not—" the stranger stammered, voice low and hurried. But before Agatha could respond, the fog seemed to swallow them entirely. Agatha cursed softly under her breath, frustration tempered with fascination. The figure had vanished into the night, leaving only the faintest traces behind. She bent carefully, scanning the cobblestones, and immediately spotted a series of footprints, partially filled with dew, leading toward the corner of the alley. They were small, deliberate, and oddly light, suggesting a careful effort to move silently. Agatha followed them with her eyes, noting the way the impressions shifted and faded as the cobblestones grew uneven, the clues becoming more subtle the farther they led. Near the base of a lamppost, she discovered a torn piece of fabric, dark and finely woven, with a faint hint of embroidery along the edge. Agatha crouched to inspect it, holding it up to the lantern light. The material's quality suggested careful workmanship, and she immediately connected it to the stranger's coat. Another breadcrumb, another piece of the puzzle. Her mind raced, connecting threads from the scream at the ball, the abandoned mask, and now this fleeting encounter. There was also a small metallic charm lying near the torn fabric, its surface scratched and worn. Agatha picked it up gingerly, turning it over in her fingers. The crescent-shaped design mirrored, she realized with a chill, the talisman the stranger had shown her days before, linking tonight's events to a larger, more calculated mystery. Whoever this person was, they had left subtle signs, almost like invitations for an observant detective to follow. The fog swirled around her, thick and concealing, yet Agatha felt invigorated rather than deterred. Carsely's streets, usually tranquil and cozy, were alive with secrets tonight, and she was piecing them together one careful observation at a time. With a final glance down the alley, she straightened and adjusted her scarf. She would continue, step by deliberate step, following these breadcrumbs wherever they might lead. Agatha Raisin knew one thing for certain: the stranger had left a trail, faint though it was, and she intended to follow it. Mystery, subtle yet insistent, now threaded through the foggy village, and she would unravel it before night's end, carefully, cunningly, and thoroughly.
Chapter 5: Secrets of the Churchyard. Agatha Raisin's footsteps crunched softly over frost-kissed grass as she approached Carsley's churchyard under the silver light of a waning moon. The village lay quiet, the distant hum of the Halloween ball fading behind her, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the occasional flutter of an owl's wings. Gravestones rose like solemn sentinels from the earth, some tilted from age, others neatly maintained, their inscriptions bathed in ghostly light. Agatha's keen eyes scanned each detail with the practiced scrutiny of someone accustomed to noticing the unusual amidst the ordinary. A faint whisper of movement caught her attention near the far edge of the yard. She paused, tilting her head, listening carefully. It could have been a branch brushing the stones, or perhaps a fox scuttling among the graves, but her instincts told her otherwise. Someone or something had been here recently. The soil in places was disturbed, footprints faintly pressed into the soft earth, and small tufts of fabric caught on jagged stones hinted at hurried passage. Agatha's curiosity sparked, and she moved closer, eyes narrowing in concentration.
Her flashlight revealed subtler anomalies. A gravestone slightly shifted, its base bearing scratch marks that did not match the normal wear of centuries, and a small wooden box partially hidden behind a low hedge. Agatha crouched to examine it, noting the rough, handmade carvings etched along its sides. She lifted the box gently, not to disturb its contents, and peered inside. A collection of letters, tied with a ribbon that had frayed at the edges, and a small, polished charm shaped like a crescent moon met her gaze. The charm immediately reminded her of the talisman and the mask from the ball, another thread connecting tonight's strange events. A soft hoot echoed through the churchyard, and Agatha allowed herself a faint smile, the tension easing slightly. Even amid shadows and whispers, the village retained its charm. There was a rhythm to her investigation, a mixture of suspense and gentle amusement as she catalogued every clue. Who had placed the box here, and why? The combination of letters and charm suggested secrecy, perhaps a warning or a hidden message intended for someone observant enough to find it. Agatha felt that familiar thrill of discovery, the satisfying tension of piecing together fragments into a coherent picture. Further along, near the oldest section of the yard, she noticed the soil around a tombstone had been recently disturbed. Small indentations suggested someone had knelt or crouched here, and faint traces of dried mud hinted at hurried activity. Agatha knelt carefully, brushing aside fallen leaves to reveal what appeared to be a small scrap of paper. Its edges were damp but legible. Cryptic words, seemingly random, yet somehow familiar from past village gossip she had overheard. Every detail seemed purposeful, every trace deliberate, leaving her mind whirring with possibilities. The church itself cast long, uneven shadows across the yard, and Agatha allowed herself a moment to take in the atmosphere. The moonlight glinted off carved angels and ornate crosses, lending a quiet majesty to the eerie scene. Despite the suspense, she found herself internally commenting on the village's peculiar charm, the way each gravestone held a story, the way the fog curled lazily around the mausoleum steps, and the gentle rustle of nocturnal wildlife. Even in mystery, Carsely remained intimate and familiar. Rising to her feet, she surveyed the churchyard once more, noting the trail of subtle disturbances, footprints, hidden items, and scraps of paper. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle, a whisper of secrets that someone had attempted to bury, literally or figuratively. Agatha Raisin straightened her coat, feeling the familiar thrill of anticipation. The churchyard had offered its first revelations, and she knew that the night's mysteries were only deepening, urging her to follow the hidden threads wherever they might lead.
Agatha Raisin crouched beside the small wooden box she had uncovered in the churchyard, carefully lifting its contents. Among the letters and trinkets was a folded slip of parchment, smaller than the others, its edges jagged as if torn hastily. She held it up to the dim moonlight, squinting at the careful script scrawled across its surface. The message was cryptic, a mixture of letters, numbers, and symbols arranged in a way that suggested purpose rather than randomness. Agatha's pulse quickened. This was no idle note. It was a clue, perhaps even a warning. The first line read like a riddle. When shadows cross the crescent, the unseen will strike. Her mind immediately traced back to the crescent-shaped charms she had encountered, the talisman shown by the stranger in the square, the small figurine in the manor's attic, and now this connection resurfacing in the churchyard. Whoever had written this knew how to leave a trail, and they expected someone observant enough to follow it. Agatha's eyes glimmered with anticipation. The game, subtle though it was, had begun in earnest. She studied the remainder of the note, noting a series of numbers, 372, 149, 685, arranged in a seemingly random order. A pattern hinted at itself, teasing her mind to decode it. Agatha mused aloud, as she often did when thinking. Perhaps a sequence of doors, or steps, or times. The digits could correspond to a location, a date, or even the letters of a name. Her lips curved into a faint smile at the mental puzzle. She thrived on this sort of intellectual challenge.
The note wasn't just a message, it was a test of perception, a gentle yet urgent provocation aimed at the careful observer. The parchment also contained faint smudges, perhaps fingerprints, though too partial to identify. Agatha noted them meticulously. Such details, though minor, often carried significance, either deliberate misdirection or accidental revelation. Her gaze flicked back to the churchyard, the disturbed graves, the letters, and the crescent-shaped trinkets, weaving them into a growing mental map. Each element seemed interconnected, a network of subtle signals pointing towards some hidden plan. A soft rustle of leaves drew her attention, and Agatha's instincts sharpened. The night was thick with secrets, and the fog curling around the gravestones reminded her that visibility was limited. Perception and logic were her allies. She carefully folded the note and returned it to the box, ensuring it remained undisturbed yet accessible for later scrutiny. Observation first, action second. That had served her well in Carsely, and tonight was no exception. Agatha stood and surveyed the churchyard once more. The moon glinted off the carved angels and tombstones, shadows stretching like fingers across the frost-covered grass. Each disturbance, the footprints, the torn fabric, the hidden trinkets, now seemed to form part of a coherent plan. The message hinted at motives, at timing, at a performer behind the night's orchestrated tension. While the author's full intent remained opaque, enough had been revealed to set her thinking, connecting disparate events into a framework she could begin to interpret. She tucked the box carefully under her arm and made her way back toward the lane leading to the village, mind alight with deductions. Each step reinforced her conviction. Carsely's night of Halloween intrigue had shifted into a calculated game, and she, Agatha Raisin, had stumbled upon its first real signposts. The cryptic note was a harbinger, a whispered invitation to unravel the antagonist's intentions before the unseen strike arrived. She knew she had to remain vigilant, patient, and meticulous. The threads of mystery were tightening, and the village's secrets demanded her attention.
Chapter 6. The Midnight Confrontation. The village of Carsely lay swathed in silence as Agatha Raisin approached the looming silhouette of Carsely Manor. Midnight had settled over the estate, and the manor's tall windows were dark, save for faint flickers from the candlelit corridors within. Agatha pulled her coat tighter. The chill of the autumn night mingled with the anticipation thrumming in her chest. This was the heart of the mystery, the point where careful observation met action, and she intended to be ready for whatever she might find. The front door, usually welcoming, now seemed more like a threshold into shadow and secrecy. Agatha slipped inside, careful to avoid the faint creak of the polished floorboards. The grand halls stretched before her, lit only by a few strategically placed sconces. Shadows played along the walls, twisting and stretching in ways that made the familiar space seem uncanny. Her eyes swept over the hall, noting a faint disturbance in the dust along the edges of the marble floor, as if someone had been pacing or moving unseen. She moved quietly, her footsteps measured, listening for subtle noises. A soft whisper echoed from a distant corridor, a hint, a suggestion of movement, perhaps even a warning. Agatha's sharp eyes caught a flicker of motion near a tall tapestry depicting the manor in its 18th century glory. The shadow behind it shifted unnaturally, and she paused, lips twitching into a faint smile. Hidden passages were common in old estates like this, often forgotten or intentionally concealed. Agatha's experience in Carsely's oddities told her that curiosity and caution would be her best allies. Slowly, she approached the tapestry, pressing her hand lightly against the thick fabric. Behind it, a narrow doorway revealed itself, almost invisible in the low light. Agatha's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of discovery. Whoever had orchestrated the night's chaos might very well be using this passage to move unseen. She made a mental note. Quiet observation first, confrontation later.
The corridor beyond was narrow, lined with dark paneling that absorbed the flickering candlelight. Agatha's senses sharpened with each step, the faint scuff of a shoe against stone, the whisper of cloth brushing against the wall, the distant hum of activity that seemed orchestrated but deliberately subtle. She catalogued every anomaly, from an oddly placed candlestick to a slight indentation in the wall that might suggest a hidden alcove. Each minor detail could prove vital. As she rounded a corner, Agatha caught sight of a fleeting figure disappearing behind another closed door. Without hesitation, she followed, pausing only to note the placement of an overturned chair and a half-empty goblet on a side table. These small signs suggested someone had been interrupted or was preparing for something, perhaps both. The thrill of anticipation coursed through her veins, tempered by her usual wry humor at the absurdity of chasing shadows in a grand manner at midnight. She paused, just outside the door, listening intently. The faint sound of hurried movement, soft footfalls, the rustle of cloth made her straighten her shoulders. Agatha Raisin had confronted peculiar and dangerous situations before, but the stakes tonight felt palpably higher. Her mind catalogued strategies, escape routes, and potential surprises. Hidden passages, subtle noises, and the manor's twisting corridors were now allies, providing clues for careful navigation. Taking a deep breath, she placed a hand on the doorknob, preparing to uncover the night's mysteries directly. The manor, usually a scene of grandeur and cozy familiarity, had transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and suspense. Agatha's determination remained steadfast. She would confront the unseen, unravel the intentions behind the chaos, and emerge with both the truth and her trademarked calm wit intact.
Agatha Raisin's hand hovered over the doorknob, senses sharpened by the tension of the manor's shadowed corridors, when a quiet, familiar voice startled her. "Going in alone, as usual?" She spun, startled for only a heartbeat, and recognized Constable Harris, the village's unassuming yet surprisingly perceptive lawman. His uniform was slightly rumpled, as though he had been moving swiftly through the manor's winding halls, and his eyes gleamed with a mixture of concern and curiosity. Agatha's lips twitched into a faint, wry smile. Of all the people she had expected tonight, Harris had not been high on the list, but she welcomed his presence. "You," she said, a touch incredulous, "decided to join my midnight adventures?" Her voice carried amusement despite the stakes. Harris smiled faintly, but his expression quickly returned to seriousness. "I thought it best not to let you wander alone. I've noticed odd things tonight, things you might find interesting." He gestured subtly toward the hallway beyond the door, suggesting that what lay ahead was worth careful attention. Agatha nodded, curiosity and cautious optimism sparking within her. Allies, even reluctant ones, could be invaluable in unraveling a carefully orchestrated plan. As they moved forward together, Harris offered bits of information in careful, cryptic hints. "There's history here, Agatha," he murmured. "Not everyone in Carsely Manor has been entirely forthcoming about their connections. Some alliances go back years, some grudges even longer." His words were deliberately vague, but Agatha's mind catalogued them with precision, fitting the fragments into the puzzle she had been assembling for hours. They paused near a side corridor, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows along the walls. Harris leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "If you're looking for the stranger who's been stirring trouble, pay attention to the small things, the way furniture is shifted, which doors are unlocked, and unusual talismans left in obvious places." He gestured toward a table adorned with a single crescent-shaped charm, identical to those she had already encountered. "They're markers," he added cryptically. "Not warnings exactly, more like breadcrumbs for the observant." Agatha's brow arched. She was impressed, though unwilling to admit it aloud. Harris's insights were precise, thoughtful, and complementary to her own observations. Together, they moved carefully through the corridor, cataloging subtle clues: a slightly ajar cabinet, a faint trail of scuffed carpet, and the faint metallic scent of a talisman dropped in haste. Each observation reinforced her suspicion that the antagonist had been planning meticulously, leaving intentional hints behind, confident or perhaps arrogant enough to believe they would go unnoticed. Despite the tension, Agatha allowed herself a touch of amusement. Harris, usually reserved and methodical, now moved with the quiet energy of a man who had been unexpectedly drawn into the middle of a village-wide puzzle. His presence reminded her of the peculiar warmth of Carsely's community. Even in moments of fear or suspense, allies emerged, often from the most unlikely places. Before they parted ways at the corner of a shadowed hall, Harris offered one final cryptic note. "Tonight will reveal intentions, but be wary of appearances. Sometimes loyalty wears a mask." With that, he slipped silently toward another corridor, leaving Agatha with both reassurance and lingering questions. Alone once more, Agatha Raisin reflected on the unexpected alliance. Harris's guidance had illuminated parts of the puzzle she might have overlooked, connecting hidden motives and past grudges to the present danger. The manor's shadows seemed less daunting, yet the stakes remained high. She straightened her coat, adjusted her scarf, and steeled herself for the next step. Tonight's mystery had grown deeper, and with a keen ally's subtle guidance, she was closer than ever to uncovering the truth behind Carsely's chilling events.
Chapter 7. Unmasking the Culprit. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the curtains of Agatha Raisin's temporary vantage point at Carsely Manor, casting the once ominous halls in soft, forgiving shades. The night's shadows had retreated, leaving behind only subtle marks of their previous mischief: overturned chairs, faint scuff marks, and the occasional stray talisman. Agatha's sharp eyes swept the room, cataloging everything once more. She had spent hours mentally retracing events: the scream at the costume ball, the abandoned mask, the fogged alley chase, the cryptic note in the churchyard. And now, piece by piece, the puzzle was crystallizing. Her mind worked quickly, yet with a calm precision honed by years of village sleuthing. Each clue fell into place: the patterns of footprints, the carefully placed objects, the cryptic messages. Agatha noted how minor details previously dismissed as incidental, a flickering lantern, a momentary glance between villagers, a mislaid glove, were now vital indicators of motive and method. The culprit's identity, once obscured behind layers of misdirection, was finally emerging from the fog. Agatha arose and paced softly, her thoughts aligning like constellations in a clear night sky. The stranger in the square, the mysterious movements in the fog, the talismans and coded notes, they were all connected, threads of a deliberately woven plan. The antagonist had orchestrated each event to manipulate attention, to mislead and provoke, yet had underestimated Agatha's persistence and observational skill. Her lips curved in a faint, satisfied smile. The pieces were hers to arrange into a coherent picture. She reviewed the evidence methodically: the abandoned mask at the ball, its blood hinting at both danger and theatricality; the crescent-shaped charm dropped in the churchyard, mirroring the talisman from the manor; the torn fabric and scattered papers left in the fog all pointed to a single orchestrator, someone intimately familiar with the village, aware of her investigative tendencies, and bold enough to stage a public spectacle. Her thoughts turned to motive. Past grudges, old alliances, and petty rivalries, which at first had seemed trivial or coincidental, now revealed themselves as carefully calculated reasons behind the night's events. The antagonist had relied on distraction, confident that the villagers' attention would focus on superficial chaos rather than underlying intent. Agatha, however, had seen through the veneer. By connecting disparate details, the whispered comments at the ball, the shifted soil in the churchyard, The cryptic messages pattern, she had mapped the labyrinth of the culprit's plan. The realization brought a quiet thrill. Agatha appreciated not only the cleverness of the antagonist, but also the elegance of the puzzle itself. Mystery, she reflected, was never purely about danger. It was a game of intellect, of perception, and of patient observation. And tonight, she had matched wits successfully, uncovering the carefully hidden truths behind the staged chaos. Finally, the identity became undeniable. A combination of subtle behavioral cues, prior village knowledge, and the sequence of orchestrated hints pointed to one person, someone both known and underestimated, whose outward demeanor had lulled the community into complacency. Agatha's gaze settled on the evidence laid before her: a folded note, a misplaced glove, a faint fingerprint. Each item confirmed what her mind had already deduced. As she leaned back against the wall, a sense of satisfaction and calm relief settled over her. Carsely's mystery had been unraveled, the antagonist's motives revealed, and connections clarified. Minor misdirections from earlier in the night, the flickering lanterns, sudden noises, and subtle glances, were now understood as intentional, not random. Agatha allowed herself a small, triumphant chuckle. The night's suspense had been intense, but the dawn brought clarity, resolution, and a cozy sense of order restored.
Agatha Raisin stood in the Manor's candlelit drawing room, observing the figure before her with calm, discerning eyes. The antagonist, no longer cloaked in shadows or secrecy, had surrendered to the inevitable unraveling of their carefully constructed plan. Their shoulders slumped, a mixture of relief and apprehension etched across a familiar face, revealing what Agatha had long suspected. Cleverness could only stretch so far when measured against patience, perception, and an unflinching attention to detail. The confession began quietly, almost as if speaking the truth aloud was both a relief and a burden. "I never intended anyone to be harmed," the antagonist murmured, voice trembling slightly. "It was a test, a way to see if Carsely could notice, if anyone would observe what I had orchestrated. The mask, the talismans, even the cryptic note, they were all part of a chain meant to draw attention, to reveal who was watching." Agatha listened carefully, noting not just the words, but the subtle inflections, the pauses, and the moments of hesitation. Each nuance offered insight into personality, motive, and the human nature behind the calculated actions. She allowed a faint, wry smile to cross her face. "A test," she said, her voice light yet tinged with amusement, "that caused more panic than necessary. Clever, yes, but also thoroughly exhausting for those of us trying to sleep through the night." Her tone balanced critique with gentle humor, easing tension while maintaining authority. The confession seemed to unfold more comfortably with each passing moment, and the Manor's atmosphere softened from suspense to a shared, almost intimate understanding of the night's events. The antagonist continued, explaining connections between their actions and past events in the village, rivalries, old grudges, and miscommunications that had simmered quietly until now. Each revelation clarified the sequence of events: why the scream at the ball, why the footprints in the fog, why the talismans were deliberately left as subtle markers. Agatha's mind cataloged everything, fitting each piece neatly into the mosaic of intrigue she had been assembling over weeks of observation. As the confession concluded, Agatha observed consequences taking root. Misunderstandings among villagers were gently resolved, and subtle reparations were implied. Careful words of apology, minor adjustments to ensure no further confusion, and a renewed sense of community cohesion. Even amid intrigue, Carsely's cozy charm persisted, reaffirmed through the calm yet engaged responses of its residents. Agatha noted these small gestures, appreciating how resolution could be both effective and quietly humane. The Manor itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Shadows softened, candlelight warmed the corners, and the air, once taut with tension, now carried a sense of closure. Agatha allowed herself a small stretch, the adrenaline of suspense giving way to satisfaction. She looked at the antagonist and offered a measured, knowing glance.
Justice had been served, curiosity rewarded, and the delicate balance of community preserved. Finally, she allowed a moment of reflection, letting her trademark wit surface. Well, I suppose next Halloween we'll have to warn the village not to underestimate a quiet observer with a keen eye and a fondness for mysteries. The comment drew a faint, rueful smile from the antagonist, reinforcing the gentle humor that underpinned even the darkest of events. With the confession complete and consequences acknowledged, Agatha Raisin felt a cozy sense of triumph settle over Carsely Manor. The threads of the night's mystery were fully unraveled, connections clarified, and emotional balance restored. Villagers, both implicated and uninvolved, could resume their routines with the satisfaction of clarity, while Agatha herself quietly savored the intellectual and emotional fulfillment of a mystery fully solved.
Chapter 8. A Halloween Morning in Carsely. Agatha Raisin stepped out into Carsely's streets just as the first light of Halloween morning bathed the village in a gentle, golden glow. The night's fog had dissipated, leaving a crisp freshness in the air that carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from chimneys. Cobblestones glistened faintly with overnight dew, and pumpkins, still perched on doorsteps and windowsills, reflected the soft light, their carved faces now benign rather than eerie. Agatha walked with her usual purposeful pace, observing the village recovering from a night of suspense, the quiet punctuated only by the occasional crow of a rooster or the gentle rustle of autumn leaves. She noticed Mr. Finch sweeping the porch of his bakery, whistling a tuneless song, the flower on his apron catching the morning light. His eyes flicked up and met hers with a sheepish grin, acknowledging perhaps the night's chaos and the small scare that had sent him scuttling from his bed. Agatha allowed a tiny, wry smile to cross her face. It was moments like these, the minor reconciliations, the unspoken acknowledgments of shared experience, that made the village feel alive and warm, even after fear had passed. Further along, she passed the churchyard, where caretakers were carefully righting small stones that had been nudged during the night's disturbances. Agatha noted the subtle way the dew highlighted footprints and scuff marks, a reminder of the mysteries that had unfolded hours earlier. Yet the work was methodical, gentle, and unobtrusive, restoring a sense of order without erasing the traces entirely. She reflected on how the village's quiet resilience often balanced the quirks and dangers that came with its charm. Near the square, Mrs. Pemberton and her grandchildren were arranging a new display of autumn decorations, laughing softly as they debated the placement of scarecrows and hay bales. Agatha observed from a discreet distance, allowing herself a moment of amusement. Even after the chaos of the past night, the scream at the ball, the fogged chase, the midnight revelations, the village's rhythm had returned. Laughter and gentle teasing filled the space, a comforting counterpoint to the tension of the previous evening. Agatha's mind wandered over the events she had navigated, the cryptic messages, the abandoned talismans, the midnight confrontation with the antagonist, and the unexpected alliance with Constable Harris. Each thread of the mystery had resolved in ways both satisfying and illuminating. She felt a warm sense of accomplishment, tempered by her customary awareness that mysteries were never entirely finished. There were always new whispers, new curiosities, waiting just beyond the familiar streets and doorways. Passing the manor, she noted the soft glow of candlelight in the windows, the home slowly stirring with quiet conversations and careful tidying up after a long night. She allowed herself a brief reflection on human nature, how fear, curiosity, and courage intertwined, often resulting in both chaos and revelation. Carsely, with its quirky residents and subtle oddities, remained a village perfectly poised for further intrigue, yet entirely capable of calm mornings such as this. With a final glance at the brightening sky, Agatha Raisin adjusted her scarf and set off toward the market, content to observe and participate in the village's gentle return to normalcy. normalcy. The morning's calm was a reward and a reminder. The balance between curiosity and peace, between suspense and coziness, was what made Carsely endlessly fascinating. Even in the quiet, the pulse of mystery lingered, subtle but enduring, leaving Agatha ready for whatever the village might present next. Agatha Raisin settled into her favorite armchair by the kitchen window, the soft morning light spilling across the floral curtains and warming the cozy room. Steam rose from her carefully poured cup of Earl Grey, carrying the comforting aroma of bergamot and tea leaves. Outside, the village of Carsely hummed with quiet life, pumpkins still perched on porches, birds hopping along fence posts, and the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. Agatha took a slow sip, savoring both the flavor and the calm that had replaced the night's suspense. Her thoughts drifted naturally to the events of the past hours. The scream at the costume ball, the eerie fog chase, the cryptic messages in the churchyard, and the midnight confrontation at the manor all now seemed like pieces of a rich tapestry, woven together with precision and purpose. She allowed herself a faint smile at how carefully the village had been observed, how minor oddities had led to major revelations. There was satisfaction in seeing a mystery unraveled, especially one threaded with the peculiar charm of Carsely's residents. Agatha glanced at the small collection of talismans and letters she had brought home, neatly arranged on the sideboard. The crescent-shaped charm gleamed softly in the morning sun, a subtle reminder of the night's intrigue. She traced a fingertip over its smooth surface, musing on the cleverness of the antagonist, the careful orchestration, and the unforeseen aid of Constable Harris. Even in chaos, there had been moments of wit, timing, and understated heroism. The village's characters, as always, had played their parts with a mixture of innocence, stubbornness, and occasional mischief. Setting her cup down, Agatha allowed her mind to wander to the subtler lessons the night had offered. Observation, patience, and attention to small details had once again proven indispensable. The unfolding events reminded her that Carsely, though quaint and familiar, held hidden layers and unexpected complexities. Even as the village returned to routine, sweeping porches, arranging decorations, and exchanging quiet conversations, she knew curiosity would always find something new to explore. The lingering hints of past misdeeds and cryptic messages suggested that mysteries, small or large, were never truly finished here. Outside, the soft laughter of children played among the remaining Halloween decorations, their carefree energy contrasting delightfully with the tense drama of the night before. Agatha allowed herself a quiet chuckle, imagining their delighted imaginations filling in the blanks of shadows and whispers. It was a reminder of why she loved Carsely, not just for the puzzles and investigations, but for the warmth and vibrancy of its people. The village had a rhythm, one that could balance suspense with serenity, danger with delight, and chaos with calm. Raising her cup once more, Agatha gazed through the window at the streets of her beloved village. A few pumpkins still flickered faintly, their carved faces now friendly companions to a village slowly waking to the day. She let her thoughts drift to the future, to quiet speculations about what might unfold next. New arrivals, old secrets resurfacing, or the subtle hints hidden in the corners of everyday life. For now, though, she allowed herself to savor the moment, the gentle warmth of tea, the comforting routine of morning, and the sense of satisfaction that comes with another mystery thoughtfully unraveled. Agatha Raisin took a final, deliberate sip, feeling both contentment and quiet anticipation. The village was safe, the mystery resolved, and yet in Carsely, the ordinary and the peculiar always intertwined. She set down her cup with a small knowing smile, already imagining the adventures that awaited her and the village she loved so dearly. The final cup of tea marked the conclusion of one story and the gentle promise of countless others yet to come.